A very good evening and a very happy Republic Day to one and all present here. The International Council for Circular Economy welcomes you to the second episode of the third season of our Circular Chat, focused on the biggest challenge we as a global community face today, climate change. The Circular Chat is an initiative by ICCE to develop and promote the idea of a circular economy. The chats aim to engage key actors to mobilize system solutions at scale, and in that regard, we wish to bring to you the opinions and immense knowledge of leading experts in the field of climate change and the various facets it covers. My name is Anuka, and it's my honor to introduce our guest speaker for the day, Dr. Pramod K Singh. Dr. Singh is a professor at the Institute of Rural Management Anand, IRMA, since 2003. He holds an MSc and MPhil degree in environmental sciences and a Ph.D. degree in sustainable development from Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. Dr. Singh has over 22 years' experience in teaching and research in the areas of environment and development planning, food and livelihood security, climate change adaptation and mitigation, etc. Dr. Singh is a lead author on the Climate Resilient Development Pathways as a part of the sixth assessment report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or the IPCC. Dr. Singh is representing the Global South in this synthesis theme. It is wonderful to have you with us today, Dr. Singh.
Thank you, Anuga.
So to start off, with your immense knowledge and experience in the field of environmental sciences and as the lead author in the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, how do you see the environmental conditions of the planet currently?
If you look at way back in 2009, rock storm, some of the studies, Scandinavian scientists along with rock storm, identified 9 planetary boundaries. Now, these represent the threshold below which the humanity can safely operate and beyond which the stability of planetary scale phenomena cannot be relied upon. Now, if you look at today, the way we have perturbed the Earth, the system, 5 of these 9 Earth processes have been identified to exceed the planetary boundary limits, which means these are now no more the safest space to operate. And these are climate change, ocean acidification, biosphere integrity that has curtailed because of the loss of biodiversity, land system change, and biogeochemical flow of nitrogen and phosphorus in the ecosystem. So these are the ones which are crossing those safe limits. Now, out of these 5, 4 are interrelated, and those are related to climate change. For example, climate change and ocean acidification, these are the similar events. Climate change essentially enhancing ocean acidification, which is and if a lot of ocean acidification happens, ocean, which is a sink for carbon dioxide today, could become source for carbon. So that's a completely undesirable situation that could happen. Now, if you look at even in terms of climate change, the global temperature over the past 10 years have been about 1.1 degrees centigrade. So last decade I'm talking about. That is warm, 1.1 degrees centigrade warmer than what it was in the second half of 19th century. That's the prehistorical industrial revolution and just prior to that. Each of the past decades, if you look at, have been warmer on record since pre-industrial times. So each successive past decades have been warmer. Global surface temperature has increased faster especially since 1970, compared to any time in the past. So these are the reality today. Now, the other phenomena, I have said that ocean acidification, land system change, and even the freshwater consumption and global hydrological cycle imbalances are relating to this. So many problems are relating to this. The other planetary boundary which rock storms and his co-workers have identified are essentially atmospheric aerosol loading, stratospheric ozone depletion, which we are already addressing. The world community has already been able to address a lot, and chemical pollution and release of novel entities in the environment. Now, apart from these 9 planetary boundary, I see there are 2 more trends which are again highly unsustainable, and those are agriculture and food system, which the world has as on today, and also the way we are urbanizing. The entire urbanization pattern is also unsustainable. So these are the major unsustainable trends we see in the world today.
Yeah. I agree, sir. The way you mentioned that everything is interconnected and that sustainability is an important part of, because we're not sustainable, a lot of these issues are happening together, because we at ICCE also recognize, the need for long-term sustainability, and in that process, equitable growth. But what we're seeing today with climate change is how it affects the populace very disproportionately. Does that relate to what you have mentioned before? And can you provide us some insights regarding that?
Yeah, as you see, that yes, the world population is affected disproportionately. The one who were not responsible and who has not been responsible for the problem are the most affected. They are facing the burden. That's precisely because if you look at the way different nations are placed on this planet, it's the developed nations which are placed in a temperate and cold zone, whereas the developing nations or underdeveloped nations are in tropical and warm world. Barring a few like Africa, South Africa and Australia, if you leave these two, then most of the developed nations, entire Europe and North America, is placed either in temperate or cold zone. So by the physical conditions itself offers that they are going to be least affected. Apart from that, if you look at, the developed world has better infrastructure. So any extreme climatic event, if it happens, their infrastructure damage is not happening so much. On the other hand, the world, which is situated in the tropical regions or warm regions, they are largely the developing nations or underdeveloped nations. The entire Africa is essentially falling under this. Part of South Asia, Southwest Asia, Southeast Asia, major part of Latin America. Yes, even Australia is also falling under warm and tropical world. So this is by design. Although they have not been responsible for creating the problem. If you look at the per capita contribution in developed world, that's much, much higher. United States per capita contribution extremely high. So Russian per capita contribution extremely high, but they are not affected so much. In fact, because of climate change, they are also getting benefits. In the cold region, the areas which were not biologically productive has now become biologically productive because of rising temperature. On the other hand, regions in the tropical and warm world, the problems are there of various kinds. Now, if you look at the lives and livelihoods as well as critical infrastructure in these warmer worlds are really at risk. You can see the millions of people around the world are experiencing water, energy, and food insecurity that we have been seeing all the time, getting reported quite often. These are caused by essentially more so heat waves, drought, floods, and ocean acidification. Also, roughly half of the world population are currently experiencing severe water scarcity for at least 1 month in a year. So if you look at it, that's about 4 billion people we are talking about out of 7.5, 7.6 billion people we have. So more than half of the people are experiencing water-related scarcity. Now, warming has reduced even agriculture productivity in large parts of the world, and more so in developing and developed nations, which are essentially in this part of the world, which essentially affects the livelihoods of farmers, fishing community, indigenous people, who largely depend on land and water-based occupations. So this is what we see. Apart from that, there are disproportionate impacts which we see. For example, if you look at the climate change has reduced economic growth globally, that is well known. But low-income households and other vulnerable and marginalized groups around the world experience more severe impacts because they don't have the kind of infrastructure which the rich are having access to. Regions with high level of poverty, regions which are conflict and violence ridden, having limited or no access to health, poor water and sanitation services, food insecurity, energy and poorly planned urbanizations are often the places who face more problem, and what we call is these are impact hotspots. So it's very evident that the world is not facing the problem on similar ways. They are facing the problem very disproportionately. Yeah.
I see, sir. So the whole division between the global north and global south has become deeper. And within the global south itself, the place where we fall into developing and developed countries, within those nations itself, those who are vulnerable are facing greater impacts than the rest of the population. So we see that as a country, as a developing nation, the imminent dangers that climate change could potentially unleash. So in your opinion, is this a case for immediate action?
Yeah, I would say there is a case for urgent action. Unless there are immediate, rapid, and large-scale reduction in greenhouse gas emissions happens, limiting warming to 1.5 degree will be beyond our reach. So it's the time to act now. Why we are saying we will explain how 1.5, if we limit our warming within 1.5 degree, how that is going to create much lesser impacts than what it is going to be in beyond 1.5 degree. So recently, as you must be knowing that the IPCC Working Group 1, which works on the physical basis of science of climate change, they have released their report. And the report shows that in the next 20 years, the global average temperature is expected to reach or exceed 1.5 degree above 1850, 1900 level. So that's the pre-industrial level. With the rapid reduction in greenhouse gas emission and reaching net zero carbon dioxide emission around 2050, that's the aspirations the world is having, is going to be extremely important. And if we do so, then yes, we can limit a lot of damages which are likely to happen. But it's extremely likely that the world is going to miss out this. Probably world would be going up to 1.6 degree or could be even beyond. The kind of actions we see today, that if we don't act in a few years, say in next 3-4 years, then it's going to be far more away from our reach. So we will not be able to attain that. By reaching a given temperature for a single year is not the same as reaching that global temperature for a long time. So it's entirely possible that some year it could be even lesser, some year it can be even beyond. But that's not the climate change we are talking about. It's a long-term trend we are looking at. So at least it has to be over a period of a decades at least or so. We often talk about 20-30 years period. Now, why we say even with 1.5 degrees centigrade, what are the kind of impacts which we are going to have? The impacts and risks we face today will increase substantially over the next 2 decades, that even with 1.5 degrees centigrade. The UN goal of achieving net, zero hunger, that is what one of the goals are, water for all, will be jeopardized through increased warming. The kind of droughts which we are likely to face, floods, sea level rise, cyclones, all these events are their intensity and frequency are rising. So these are going to rise. Because of all this, the vulnerable regions of the world, including Africa, small island nations, and South Asia, is going to be affected more. The expected urban population growth in areas which are highly exposed to climate change will put people living in coastal cities and settlements at much higher risk because they are also likely to increase sea level rise. Risk of water contamination and wildfire are going to increase even with 1.5 degrees centigrade. In less than 10 years, the number of people living in extreme poverty is likely to increase by, say, 1.3 million globally due to climate change alone. That's the report also talks about, hopefully. And health risk, including heat-related deaths, so whenever the heat stress are there, infectious disease cycles are enlarged because you have warmer temperature in most part of the year. And relating to that, those are mental health challenges are also projected to rise. So that's the condition we say. But there, along with that, there could be also possibility of cascading health risk. In every region of the world, extreme weather events are combining to create a serious cascading health risk, especially because of those heat waves and heat-related stress. And those are, again, a cause of concern. But what if we are not able to meet that 1.5 degree target and we are going to exceed that? So at 2 degrees of global warming, heat extremes would be much more than what we otherwise we are projecting. That would, in fact, reach critical tolerance threshold for agriculture and health both. So one is that agriculture productivity is going to be severely impacted and health is going to be severely impacted. Heavy rains will become more frequent and increase with more warming. At global scale, extreme rainy daily rainfall events and intensifying by about 7% for every 1 degree centigrade warming. That is what is also projected. With global warming, we will continue to see intensification of global water cycle. So which means water cycle will get intensified, essentially mean that there will be less water for our use because it's quickly find its way to the sea. A lot of runoff loss will happen. Coastal area are going to be far more severely affected. As you understand, large part of human civilization across the globe are on the low-lying coastal areas. So these are going to be the severe impacts which are going to happen, not with mentioning also to the more pronounced wildfire and many such events. So that's why it's extremely important that we act now. Yeah.
Yes, sir. Like you mentioned, to manage global temperatures, and we know that island nations might submerge because of the rising water levels as well. All of this, I believe, cannot be solved by one nation or just one set of community, right? I believe that as an international community, the global nations have to take steps together. So, in your opinion, what steps do the international community need to take to avert all of these catastrophic consequences that you have mentioned that could occur if we don't meet the requirements that you have mentioned?
Yeah, I think this realization is very much there with the global community. And it's as you know, in Paris, in 2015, we had a Paris Agreement. And Paris Agreement essentially wanted to limit warming below 2 degrees Celsius. And they, in fact, instituted a special report by IPCC which talks about what is going to happen with 1.5 degree, if we limit warming within 1.5 degree, and if not, then what is going to happen if 2 degree warming happens. So that is the major goal which Paris Agreements is having, limiting warming anywhere below 2 degrees centigrade. And nations are expected to cut down their emissions. Now, as you understood that, yes, I think we have seen the developed nations have their share of greenhouse gases, and they have emitted in the past, and they are on a faster pace of cutting their emissions. But world as a whole, it is the Paris Agreement essentially mentions that we should peak the GHG emission in a way that the temperature should peak by 2050. So, in fact, it should peak as soon as possible, and we should reach net zero by 2050. So that is net zero emission by 2050. So that is what the IPCC, the Paris Agreements essentially talks about. Now, as you understand, all nations cannot work on a similar scale. There are poor nations who do not have access to technology. They don't have access of finances. So it is said that, well, all nations would start working, but they will work under the principle of common but differentiated responsibility. The responsibility is common because the global climate change is a common responsibility to address. But since they have a differential capability, so they will work based on their respective capability. Those who do not have that kind of capability, they will work within that limits. Now there has also been arrangement for burden sharing, where the developed nations were supposed to provide financial resources as well as technology to developing nations and underdeveloped nations. And at that point in time, $100 billion per annum was agreed by developed nations to be provided to the developing nations. And it was suggested that by 2025, we will scale it up. In fact, this year in Glasgow Pact, Prime Minister of India, Mr. Modi, has already said that we need to have commitment of $1 trillion annual commitment by developed nations. But yes, even if you look at today's commitment, $100 billion, that is not being met. And out of that, whatever money is that we receive, about 25-30% of that is coming to the developing nations. Out of that, the major share is coming for mitigation, and little is there for adaptation. So it's the developing nations who are left in the situation where they are. Their adaptation needs are not getting addressed. Now, considering this, they have also planned that, well, there will be nationally determined contribution, what they call NDC, where each country would prepare their plans and communicate to the global community of how they are going to act. And for that, every 5 years, starting 2023, every 5 years, we will have what we call is global stocktake. And the first stocktake is scheduled in 2023. 23 was put because by this year anyway, all these IPCC reports will be released and world will have a state-of-the-art access to knowledge by that time. So this is what we have. If we talk about the recent climate report, which IPCC has also released, and the way we have been working, four main options which were suggested to address this. One is energy system transition, which essentially means how quickly are we going to transform our energy systems to net zero. Industrial system transition, how industries, because industry itself contributes to 1/3 of total emissions, considering the the energy it uses, and also emissions from industrial processes. Land-ocean ecosystem transition is the third one. And then urban infrastructure system transition, how we do that. But to my opinion, that those systems are fine if we have proper societal transitions. The human race need to advance value-driven system of production and consumption in both industrialized and developing societies that value biodiversity, reintegrates human with the nature, and allow humankind to flourish as genuinely Homo sapiens, which are supposed to be wise, sensible, and judicious. Yeah.
Yeah, so like you mentioned, how this is a common responsibility that the global community has to the fight against climate change. This goes beyond just, I believe, the governments at play. This goes to the citizens of the global community as well, and many of them, might believe or feel that their governments are not taking adequate action against climate change, or they should be doing more. In those cases, are there any corrective actions that local communities and the normal people could potentially take that could, enable them to fight against climate change in their own, rights and beliefs?
Yeah, very true. Because it's not that only government will do and we as the citizens are not going to do. In fact, our future depends on what we do, how we live our lives, how we safeguard our climate and nature. Starting now and involving everyone. That has to be the major emphasis by all of us. Now, which essentially mean that all citizens, they are the one who are anyway facing the problem, so they need to take adaptive measures. And the current adaptation efforts, the impacts we face today, have been substantially very much lower than what it should have been. So this gives a case for the community to take action. For example, we have seen talked about that food system is something which is going to be affected severely, and that is something which we cannot live without. So food security can be improved by adopting a stress-tolerant crops, livestock, fish species, and varieties. So that is where those need adoption has to be by all citizens. Diversification of the farm, better weather information, monitoring, evaluation, so many things, monitoring and maintaining these resources in a proper shape. So those are again by all the farmers. Even for regulated, if regulated properly, irrigation has proved to be highly effective in coping with the changing rainfall patterns. When used in increasingly drought-prone area, it can lock the unsustainable land use and also ensure productivity, adequate productivity of agriculture. Similarly, strengthening health systems, which is essentially at all level, not necessarily the national government will do, but even the local government could do, can reduce the impacts of infectious disease, heat stress, and climate-related risk, especially if they are combined with other measures such as early warning system, improved access to drinking water and sanitation related aspects. So many action essentially has to happen at local level. Which essentially mean what we call is, even if the national governments are there, the local citizen has to work, the local government has to work, the national, sub-national government has to work, national government has to work, and again there has to be also, in fact, efforts at industries, because they are also one of the important, though they may not be contributing directly to adaptations, but they are the one who could act a lot on, I would say, mitigation. Yeah.
So, like you mentioned right now, how about how industries play a really big part in the global economy as well, right? They provide to the global economy, ensure the flow of the economy, but they also provide to the pollution, to the troubles that the environment faces today. And it's an aspect that people tend to notice, but also do not tend to discuss. Now, I think it's quite important to include industries in this plan of fighting against climate change as well. How do you think the industries can be included so that they become part of the solution and not just part of the problem?
Yeah, as I said, the industry contributes about one third of total emissions, so their role is becoming extremely crucial. Now, often globally, it is talked a lot that industry should go for decarbonization. And in the measures of decarbonization, essentially what they have gone is they have worked a lot on energy efficiency. So if they use less energy, certainly less energy generation is expected, and that is the benefit going to happen. And also they have been taking part in innovations in energy sources, a lot of renewable energy, carbon capture, huge energy storage, feedstock and biogenic carbon. So all these innovations have come from industry. So that's about what they can work on decarbonization. But as you know, a lot of industry also work on materials which essentially used in the industrial processes. And the more material we use, more of this energy is also going to be used. So dematerialization to me is equally important measures what we see in case of decarbonization. And when we say dematerialization, where I think you looking at circular economy and all, so part of that is essentially part of that. So first we talk about material efficiency. Like energy efficiency, we can also talk about material efficiency across entire value chain of the industry. Now, at design stage, we can use less of material, design for long life, reuse, design for adaptability, design for recovery, because that has to be done in the beginning itself. Then only you can, the kind of circular economy you are talking about can happen. Again, at manufacturing stage could reduce waste. At use stage, you can extend life. So in a way, you are not going to use much of your material. So that is one part. Then you are also going to have other set of measures, circular economy you talk about, demand management of raw material itself. How can we manage that demands? What are the kind of innovations in process and products we can have? How can we have our green supply chain? So these are also the measures which are also going to address a lot of emissions. If you simple way, if you use less of material, less of those processing requirements are going to be there, and that is going to have help on in terms of reducing energy requirement. I would say there are two more measures. There are a role which government has to play in order to regulate industry, and also the kind of corporate strategy which industries are expected to have are also extremely important. So now if we talk about in terms of say the role which government is expected to play, those are essentially, one is the technology push, because as you understand, industry is essentially developing the technology, but as you know, basic research and small scale pilots are not very cost intensive. The moment it comes to large scale piloting or early deployment in lead or niche markets and full scale commercial deployment, which are becoming very, very costly, and they often lose their competitive advantage. So that is the time government has to provide all those measures which the government has in terms of tax rebates, in terms of funding partially, and so many other measures which the government is having. Government also has an option of market pull option, which they could regulate in terms of public procurement. When they procure, they say, well, if you are going with these kinds of, coming up with these kinds of products, I don't mind to pay even higher. That is when L1 is not going to be the only criteria. This is also going to be one of the criteria for public procurement. They can also come out with the guidelines for private procurement. And then government has other measures like mandatory performance standards, carbon content certification, and so many other things. So these are something which they need to do. Apart from that is the enabling corporate strategy, like the way they look at capitalism is need to be considered in different way. They have to understand the new conception of transparency, new construction of collaborative and constructing lobbying for these initiatives are something which industry can certainly be able to participate. So there are fabulous solutions which industry can bring since they have enough money. And where we say that GDP runs on carbon dioxide emission, but we can tunnel through, we can think of running without having much of that carbon dioxide emission. Yeah.
So I think it's quite safe to say from our entire discussion that action needs to be taken at all levels using the technologies that we've developed and the knowledge that we've gathered to make actual prominent change so that we don't have as much catastrophic events as experts such as yourself predict might happen if we do not, take care of the situation. Our audiences have, been quite, have enjoyed our session quite a lot, and they find it quite insightful. But I do not see any questions in the live chat. But other than that, sir, I think thank you so much, Dr. Singh, for being here with us. I would also like to thank everybody who decided to join our live session today. So the scientific backing and the knowledge that you bring through your discussions makes it all the more important. I've solidified that this is something that is worth working for, something we need to, look into as soon as possible. So thank you so much for that, sir. Before we conclude, I would also like to draw everyone's attention that the upcoming Indian Circular Economy Forum, scheduled to take place on the 2nd and 3rd June, is inviting keynote speakers, and that you, as our audience, can also nominate speakers for the event. If I could, in fact, share a video with all of you for the same, I would like to do that now. Just give me 1 second, sir.
Sure.
Just a second, sir. Is it visible by chance?
No.
I think, yeah, I think it should be visible now.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Our world is only 8.6% circular. Global warming is happening. The pandemic has aggravated the problem. The whole world is trying to find solutions. A rapid transition to a circular economy is important to support the sustainable recovery of our economy. Deep dive into why and how circular economy can help rebuild resilience in the economy at India Circular Economy Forum ICEF 2022. International Council for Circular Economy brings the first edition of India Circular Economy Forum. 2 days of information, action, ideas, and examples. 16 sessions, 60 plus speakers, 150 plus corporates, 5 ministries, over 200 decision makers. Be a part of transformational changes and systemic thinking. Build courageous collaborative partnerships. Join us at ICEF 2022. Our world is...
Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you.
To nominate a speaker, you can click on the link which is given in the live chat box. We would add it in the live chat box of our YouTube live. So once again, I would like to thank all of you, and you especially, sir, for joining us today. We will be back at the same time next week. And if you don't want to miss out on any updates or future conversations, do follow our social media pages and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Once again, thank you so much and see you next week at the Circular Chat.